In this video, I'll argue that discriminatory models, and discriminatory policies as well, violate the principles of social justice and civil liberties. An argument rarely spelled out explicitly. Now, I'm not saying we should compromise the performance of important models by suppressing protected variables in order to be politically correct. Instead, the only viable remedy is to get more data, specifically more independent variables to serve as inputs. That is, widen the table of training data until the model performs just as well without inputting a protected class. If and when a discriminatory model outperforms a non-discriminatory one, that is, if withholding protected inputs compromises predictive performance, this is a signal not to unguard and pounce on those variables, but rather to collect more attributes about each person. Just as we human decision makers would strive to see as much beyond, let's say, race as we can about a job candidate or criminal suspect, making an analogous effort on a larger scale to widen the database will enable our computers to transcend discrimination as well. Resistance to investing in this data expansion effort would reveal a willingness to compromise these civil liberties, the very liberties we were trying to protect with policies and law enforcement in the first place. Any predictive model can be continually improved by amassing more elements from what's an open-ended range of behavioral data, including, for example, personal and professional activities. Myriad as yet undiscovered behavioral patterns would catch more terrorists, repeat offenders, fraudsters, and even risky debtors than screening by demographic category. A protected category is demographic, so it provides less information about future behavior. Behavior predicts behavior better in general. Including it as a factor would only distract predictive modeling from pinpointing the best way to instead screen by prior behavior. Doing so could also reinforce existing biases among analytics practitioners on your team and lessen the perceived importance of behavioral data. There is more powerful expressive data out there. We just need to go out and get it. To have faith in human individuality is to bravely presume that the behavioral history about an individual, if only we had enough of it at our fingertips, would be more predictive than the category to which he or she belongs. Behavioral data betrays one's nature. People are not a product of their demographic category. Resistance to enhancing data collection for these purposes is resistance to progress. It stands in opposition to both social justice and to improved decision making. Those who resist argue that broadening behavioral data would require too great an investment, but relying solely on the data currently available entrenches us into a kind of passive inertia that costs us the value to be gained from bigger and better data. If instead we obey the data and make discriminatory decisions, we violate the most essential notions of fairness and civil rights. Even if it's true that my group commits more crime, it would violate my rights to be held accountable for the others, to have my classification count against me. We must not penalize people for their identity. Basing decisions even partly on a protected class commits prejudice in the most literal sense. It is the act of prejudging a person by their race, religion, gender identity, or other sensitive characteristic. This holds just as well for decisions based on multiple factors, that is, models that also take other inputs. Even in that case, the inclusion of race, for example, renders the process nonetheless prejudice. It results in subjecting people of one race to a different decision process than people of another race. Assessing a person in part by protected class is antithetical to the very notion of equality, that all men, all people, are created equal. Besides, actively punishing a protected group perpetuates the cycle that got us here in the first place. Oppressing a people is a presumed contributor to, for example, the crime rates of that people. Such history is indeed why U.S. law has sought to protect these groups. It's an affront to all members of the discriminated groups. A crime prediction model that penalizes because of one's status as an African American. There couldn't be a more blatant case of criminalizing blackness. We're meant to protect groups, not discriminate against them. That's why they're called protected classes. Rational discrimination is a severe compromise that comes out on the wrong side of history. To the degree machine learning experts subscribe to rational discrimination, we're facing a serious emerging threat. Discriminatory models automated by computers wreak more havoc than humans manually implementing discriminatory policies. Once it's computerized, that is, once it's crystallized as a model, a discriminatory decision process executes automatically, coldly, and on a more significant scale, affecting greater numbers of people. Formalized and deployed mechanically, it takes on a concrete, accepted status. It becomes the system. More than any human, the computer is the man. Ultimately, behavioral data always prevails, but only a steadfast investment in that approach delivers the goods. During development, if behavioral data fails to outpredict a discriminatory model, that's not a sign of failure. Rather, it's a signal we must continue the efforts by collecting more behavioral data. This practice will pay off handsomely. Behavioral screening built upon enriched data strengthens security. This is the very process of bringing decision-making fully into the information age. We can do better for both security and social justice, so we must. Thanks for listening, and I hope you take some time to consider.